The judge, in no uncertain terms, said that that was not the correct behavior and that he threatened to preclude Sean Diddy Combs from being inside of the courtroom for possibly the duration of his own trial if he continued to look at the jurors and nod and react in any way to the testimony that was coming in. This was a really big moment, of course, for the judge to make this statement. He is on trial, of course, fighting for his life, could spend the rest of his life in prison.
The tension in the courtroom was unbearable one moment. Diddy was just sitting quietly, and the next the judge's gavel slammed down with an explosive warning. What did Diddy do to provoke such a reaction? And how could something, this small risk, his entire case? Stick around to find out the critical misstep that almost got him thrown out.
Judge Arun Subramanian said to Mark Agnifilo, one of Sean Combs' defense counsel's defense attorneys, Mr. Agnifilo, your client was looking at jurors and nodding vigorously. This can't continue, or I will give a limiting instruction you won't like, or other measures, including barring your client from the courtroom. Do you understand? And Agnifilo responds, yes.
There was a major moment just now inside of the Diddy trial. While the jury had left the room, the judge had a conference with the actual attorneys, at which point the judge said, I was so clear this morning to Mr. Agnifilo, who is the lead counsel. I was so clear this morning there were not to be any reactions to this jury. There were not to be any theatrics. Was I or was I not clear? Mr. Agnifilo said that they were clear about it. He then admonished Sean Diddy Combs, the defendant in this RICO trafficking and prostitution case, that he had been nodding at the jury. He had been looking straight at the jurors. The judge, in no uncertain terms, said that that was not the correct behavior and that he threatened to preclude Sean Diddy Combs from being inside of the courtroom for possibly the duration of his own trial if he continued to look at the jurors and nod and react in any way to the testimony that was coming in. This was a really big moment, of course, for the judge to make this statement. He is on trial, of course, fighting for his life, could spend the rest of his life in prison if he is convicted of all 5 charges. The judge said he expects this not to happen again, that the defendant in his case would look at the jurors, would nod, or in any way react.
The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with reporters, spectators, and legal experts eager to witness the latest development in Diddy's high-profile trio. The air felt still yet charged, as every movement in the room was tracked with precision. At the center of it all sat Diddy, dressed sharply but keeping a low profile, his shoulders rigid under the weight of the proceedings. The hum of whispered conversations died down as the judge entered, and all attention shifted to the front of the courtroom. What started as an ordinary day in the trial took a dramatic turn with a single, almost imperceptible gesture. Midway through the day's testimony, Diddy made eye contact with a few members of the jury and gave a small nod. At first, it seemed harmless, a quiet moment. Of acknowledgement was it meant to convey, confidence, gratitude, no one could be sure. But the reaction to it was anything but subtle. The judge's gavel struck the bench like a shotgun blast, and the room froze. Proceedings came to an abrupt halt. As the judge shifted their gaze toward the defendant's table, the judge's tone was firm and unyielding as they addressed Diddy, directly making it clear that any form of communication with jurors, no matter how minor, was strictly forbidden. Interacting with jurors during a trial is considered an absolute breach of courtroom protocol. The rules are in place to ensure impartiality, preventing any perception of undue influence on those responsible for deciding the case's outcome. Even something as minor as a nod can be interpreted as an attempt to sway opinions, especially in high-stakes trials, where public perception already looms large. Their reasoning goes beyond just the letter of the law. Protecting the jury from any outside influence upholds the legitimacy of the entire legal process. The judge's warning sent ripples through the courtroom. Attorneys shifted in their seats, reporters scribbled frantically on notepads, and spectators exchanged wide-eyed glances. The room, previously marked by its quiet focus, was now coated with an air of unforeseen tension. Diddy's legal team leaned in close to him at the defendant's table, their voices low but hurried. The judge's rebuke had added a new layer of complication to a trial already rife with challenges. Although the judge didn't expel Diddy in that moment, their message was clear: another misstep of any sort and consequences would escalate swiftly. What made the moment even more significant was how it forced everyone to adjust: Diddy, his attorneys, and even the jury, who suddenly found themselves at the heart of the drama. Every side no had to recalibrate their strategies, reshaped by this brief but potent moment for the jury. No matter how impartial, they might remain the image of Diddy. Acknowledging them couldn't easily be erased. From their minds, whether the nod humanized him or made him seem manipulative was anyone's guess. But one thing was certain, this small act carried weight. Could a single seemingly minor gesture jeopardize an entire trial? Only time would tell. But after this dramatic interruption, the stakes had never been higher for Diddy and his team.
She really just, for the most part, if she didn't remember something, she said, I don't remember, even if it was something that happened relatively soon as far as the date goes, or when it had happened back in 2016. And it felt like the focus of the cross-examination for the most part, I'm sure you've already been discussing it, Jesse, it's just what she recalled and when she recalled it, specifically whether or not these injuries occurred and did they occur because of Sean Combs. And I think some of the big stuff that Nicole Westmoreland was really going over during the cross-exam was, for example, showing her photos about her sending a picture which looked like drugs. It had pills, there was crystallized substance in these exhibit photos, and Nicole Westmoreland was like, oh, so things were just business as usual just after this incident occurred. But I think the big kind of gotcha moment in a way was just that the defense brought up Diddy's hotel receipts, and specifically receipts from when he had checked into the Trump Hotel September 24th through September 29th of 2016, because Brianna, while on the stand, or Bonna, while she was on the stand, was saying that she believed that this date, or the date of the incident, had occurred in late September, specifically September 25th or September 26th. But as the defense pointed out towards the end of their cross-examination, Sean Combs and even Cassie in some aspects.
We've been asked a lot whether or not Sean Combs is participating in his defense. If you see him talking to his attorneys, passing notes, telling them what to ask, are you seeing any of that?
Oh, absolutely. Every single day. And, you know, I have this kind of phrase to myself where it feels like Sean Combs, aka Diddy, is really kind of quarterbacking his own defense team. It seems like, from what I can see of him, he's always jotting down notes. He's always paying close attention to, one, the exhibits, but also what the witnesses are saying. So, for example, when Bonna was on the stand and Bonna was asked under cross-examination whether or not she worked on the Bad Boy reunion tour, I saw Diddy just nodding his head along while Nicole Westmoreland was asking this line of questioning. So I don't know if that was just kind of a candid moment that he was having, but there are times where I see him, one, actively participating in his defense, but also kind of answering the questions that the defense attorney is asking, but to the witness and not himself. And so he is an active participant in his defense. There is no passiveness with him being on that defense table, not one bit.
The judge's reaction wasn't just firm, it was a sharp and immediate assertion of authority in any courtroom. The judge acts as both referee and gatekeeper, ensuring that every aspect of the trial adheres to strict rules. They wield immense power not just over the courtroom's proceedings, but over the narrative itself. In Diddy's case, the breach of protocol could not go unchecked, and the judge made that clear with a no-nonsense rebuke. Their gavel strike wasn't for show. It was a direct signal that Diddy's actions weren't just frowned upon, but could jeopardize every structure of the trial. The severity of the warning wasn't lost on anyone. The judge laid out the stakes in plain terms. If Diddy repeated the gesture or did anything that could be interpreted as an attempt to sway the jury more serious, consequences would follow. This wasn't an empty threat. Judges have the authority to charge disruptive behavior with contempt, or in extreme cases even remove the defendant from the courtroom entirely. For Diddy, that would have been catastrophic. If removed, he would miss critical moments of testimony and lose the ability to assist his defense team in real time. It wasn't just about courtroom decorum, it was about strategy. This wasn't the first time a high-profile case saw a defendant nearly derail their own trial with subtle actions. In one widely reported case, a defendant in a political corruption trial was warned after repeatedly glancing at jurors during breaks, something the defense later argued was completely innocent. Yet even instances like that are enough to make judges step in and maintain a clear divide between jurors and defendants. The rules exist to preserve fairness and jury tampering, whether deliberate or perceived, strikes at the heart of what makes the judicial system credible. As the judge issued the warning, an undeniable shift rippled through the room. The attorneys at the prosecution table maintained a professional air, but their glances between one another hinted at an internal reaction. Was this their opportunity to play on Diddy's perceived lack of respect for courtroom rules? The jury, too, had suddenly become the focus not just of legal arguments, but of subtle unintended theatrics for the audience in the gallery. It was another reminder of how unpredictable even the most straightforward legal proceedings can become the risk for Diddy wasn't just the possibility of being reprimanded again, it was also the message this moment sent to the jurors. Would they see his nod as an overstep? Perhaps even as reckless or arrogant in celebrity trials where the world is, watching public figures are scrutinized at every level, and jurors are not immune to the weight of what they observe. Legal experts agree that the smallest misstep can snowball, especially when dealing with someone as well known as Diddy. Courtroom behavior sends signals, intentional or not, and those signals can stick. By the time the judge finished speaking, the courtroom was left quieter, tighter, and more on edge. The warning wasn't just about making an example of Diddy, it was a reset button pressed in real time, telling everyone, both defendant and legal team, to operate with more discipline for Diddy's side. The challenge was now clear. This trial wouldn't simply hinge on arguments and evidence. Every movement, every gesture, and every choice moving forward would be placed under a microscope. How would his team rise to the occasion?
It had to do with the exhibits that Jane will be testifying to when she takes the stand next, which is very soon. So they had to do with the Jane exhibits. The press, for the most part, was concerned about not getting these exhibits because, again, for our viewers who don't know, we unfortunately are not going to be able to see the exhibits, such as photographs, such as text message exhibits, in the fashion that we normally do. Why? Because the government says there's so much redaction that needs to be done. So in these text messages, they kind of show Jane's personal information as far as concerning her family members and as far as concerning what could be identifiable information that could possibly help release her name out into the public. And they definitely don't want that, especially after what had happened to Mia. And so the government was saying that they can release the photos and the videos that don't depict Jane, and they can easily be released, possibly even the same day. But as far as her text and those photos that do show her face, do show identifiable features, those will take a little bit more, or take a little bit longer of a time to just redact those. And so the media organization kind of legal representative was saying that the government should have redacted these exhibits before she had testified, or before she testifies today. The media organization also saying that the press has a right and needs to see these exhibits, and delayed access is not effective access. And so what the judge ended up ruling is that he did end up siding with the government in this part, and that the media application to see these exhibits, even if it was just certain members of the press to see these exhibits, that application was denied.
I have seen it, of course, with theatrical and particularly disruptive defendants who are told to calm down or not to be theatrical in the way they are presenting to the jury to sway them. I've also heard it if the judge believes that somehow the conduct of the defendant might possibly influence or intimidate the jurors in this case, direct eye contact or otherwise. But to have this particular reaction in this high profile of a case when a defense is well versed in the appellate process and knows full well that anything that the judge orders their defendant and client not to do, if a conviction results, could very well go up on appeal. And of course, you've got the common sense notion. Imagine, if you will, the hypothetical. If you were accused of a horrendous crime, and the jurors will naturally, as human beings, look to the defendant for some human reaction of any kind. If one is not provided, there could be some adverse inference drawn for that jurors. And so if you are a defendant, it is a human instinct to react. The judge, however, had a very tight leash on this trial, including the attorneys and beyond. This was a moment that I have not seen where Sean Diddy Combs, who is normally stoic, looking ahead, has been threatened. If he reacts and looks at the jury and nods along with the testimony in an effort to try to persuade them on his own thoughts, he could possibly not be present for his own criminal federal trial.
The warning hung in the air like static electricity, and Diddy's defense team knew they had to act quickly. The judge's rebuke had shifted the tone of the room entirely, and it was now up to the attorneys to pull the case back on track for a team with so much on the line. This wasn't just about calming the immediate tension, it was about ensuring. This moment didn't leave a lasting stain on the jury's perception of their client. The clock was ticking, and every second counted behind the silence at the defendant's table. There was an unmistakable undercurrent of urgency. Diddy's lawyers huddled together in whispers, though muted to the audience. Their body language was unmistakable, clipped gestures, heads drawn close, pen shitting paper as strategies shifted on the fly. Restoring order and building back credibility was priority number one. They weren't just addressing the immediate fallout, they were managing the optics. How Diddy's mishap was framed in This moment would matter as much as how it was handled legally. Diddy himself sat still, occasionally glancing toward his lawyers with a tight expression. The stern warning appeared to land as his body language shifted dramatically after. The exchange gone was the calm and composed demeanor he'd started the day with. In its place was a more restrained, almost stiff presence, no more casual glances to anyone in the room, and certainly no more jury nods whether he felt shaken or simply determined to avoid further issues. It was clear he knew the focus was now on him. More than ever, his legal team had to tread delicately. They needed to acknowledge the judge's authority while subtly redirecting attention to the matter. Then the trial itself. During a brief recess, the lead attorney calmly approached the judge's bench. Speaking in low, measured tones, the exact conversation wasn't audible, but multiple. Outlets reported that the defense assured the judge their client fully understood the gravity of the situation and would strictly abide by courtroom rules moving forward. This wasn't just placation. It was a crucial move to establish decorum and work toward rebuilding the trust that momentarily wavered. The defense made no direct appeal to the jury, knowing that could backfire and reinforce the very issue they were trying to downplay. Instead, they opted for quiet professionalism, relying on their handling of the situation to speak for itself. The calculated restraint showed the jury, perhaps deliberately, that they were taking this seriously without leaning into theatrics. But this balance was a tightrope walk they needed to defend Diddy's reputation without undermining the authority of the court, all while keeping the jury from interpreting the knot as an act of manipulation. By the time proceedings resumed, the defense had stabilized the courtroom both in tone and appearance. They had worked to ensure the disruption wouldn't derail their broader strategy, but the stakes had undeniably grown higher. It was a reminder that even in moments where everyone resets and moves forward, the memory of what just happened lingers, especially with jurors. How that brief gesture would shape the rest of the trial was now left entirely to interpretation. The jury's role in any trial is immense, but in a high-profile case like this one, the weight they carry becomes even more significant. They aren't just fact-finders, they are arbiters whose decision will ripple far beyond the courtroom. In a trial involving someone like Diddy, every moment feels magnified, not just because of the stakes, but because jurors know they're part of something everyone is watching. That awareness brings a unique kind of scrutiny to the defendant's behavior, and Diddy's subtle yet impactful nod didn't go unnoticed for the jurors. Interpreting such an act isn't as simple as it may appear. Some might see it as a moment of connection, a respectful acknowledgement that they hold the power over his future. Others could view it through a different lens, interpreting it as an attempt at manipulation, no matter how small. A nod like that could feel calculated to sway them. In cases like this, perception is everything. Jurors aren't just listening to arguments, they're watching every move, every micro-expression. They're tasked with setting opinions aside. But human nature doesn't stop at the courthouse door. It's not unusual for courtroom behavior to leave an impression. Andres in another high-profile case. A witness's repeated glances at the jury box were seen as inappropriate and sparked a discussion about how much influence nonverbal cues can truly have. And let's not forget cases where defendants have appeared overly casual or expressive, with jurors later citing those behaviors as reason to question their sincerity. Diddy's case adds another layer to this dynamic. It's one thing when a juror feels scrutinized, but it's entirely different when they feel directly acknowledged by the figure on trial. That thin line between human gesture and influence becomes a major point of contention. Experts in body language have suggested that Diddy's nod might not have been as innocent as it seemed. While some believed it was a natural reflex, others saw it as a move carefully made to humanize him before the jury. High-profile cases often force defendants into an impossible balancing act, appearing approachable without seeming manipulative, showing composure without coming across as detached. The jury, whether consciously or not, may hold into this moment for the rest of the trial. Even if they don't openly discuss it, small behaviors like this can quietly affect how they interpret everything that comes next. The pressure on jurors in celebrity trials is profound. They must weigh evidence while filtering out the immense public narrative surrounding the figure in front of them. This unique environment magnifies the smallest of moments, making Diddy's nod more than just a split-second gesture. It's something they'll carry, a subtle but significant imprint on their view of him as a person. Whether it strikes them as harmless or calculated is something no one, perhaps not even Diddy's team, can fully predict. But one thing is certain: how they perceive his actions will undoubtedly color their deliberations. Moving forward, this was more than a warning. It was the closest Diddy had come to losing control over his trial. And potentially, the outcome itself, the stakes, couldn't have been higher for Diddy. Everything was on the line: his reputation, his career, and the potential legal consequences he faced in what had already been an unrelenting public spectacle. A single decision by the judge could have changed everything. And in that moment, the weight of that possibility visibly pressed on Diddy and his team. This wasn't just about a trial, it was about whether Diddy could maintain composure as the entire courtroom. And the outside world watched. His every move, the judge's warning, wasn't an empty gesture. Removing a defendant from the courtroom isn't unheard of, especially in cases where behavior crosses a line. While Diddy's nod may have seemed minor to the casual observer, the implications were anything. But had the judge decided it was an act of juror influence, or worse, a sign of contempt for courtroom rules, Diddy could have been escorted out, potentially for the remainder of the trial. In such scenarios, a defendant's removal risks severe consequences. It disrupts the defense's ability to react dynamically to testimony, and it prevents the jury from seeing the defendant as engaged or involved, which can subtly shift their perception. Looking back at other high-profile cases, the impact of courtroom removals is undeniable. In one infamous trial, a defendant's repeated outbursts led to their eventual expulsion, leaving their defense team scrambling to explain their absence, while jurors silently formed their own judgments. While these situations differ, the principle remains clear. Nothing throws a trial into disarray faster than a perceived breakdown in decorum. From the defendant, and in Diddy's case, that nod risked walking the line between a simple misunderstanding and a clear breach of protocol. But the aftermath of the warning wasn't just about courtroom rules, it was personal. Diddy sat in that courtroom as more than just an artist or a public figure. He was a man confronted by the weight of his challenges, carrying the expectations of not only himself but the team defending him. The trial itself was scrutiny enough, but beneath the surface, the emotional toll on Diddy had begun to show. That moment, that nod, was a reminder that even the smallest cracks in composure could have devastating effects, especially for someone already carrying the burden of constant public judgment. This is where celebrity trials become uniquely fragile. Every action, including those as minor as a subtle nod, becomes amplified. Celebrities don't always get the luxury of slipping up unnoticed. They're under a tighter lens, and Diddy's case underscores how even a brief gesture can cast a shadow over serious legal proceedings. It's our reminder of how thin the line is between control and chaos in trials like this. For Diddy, the lesson was clear. This wasn't just about his legal team strategy, it was about mastering himself under extraordinary pressure. This trial wasn't just about legal arguments, it revealed the intense spotlight public figures face in moments of extreme pressure. Diddy's simple nod became a symbol of how fragile the balance inside a courtroom can be, where every gesture carries weight. For someone like Diddy, his very humanity, flaws, and all is magnified to the jury and the public. It's a reminder of how the pursuit of justice can hinge on perception as much as the facts. What happens next in this trial remains unknown. But one thing is clear: every move from here forward will shape not only the verdict but his legacy.